Okay, 10th grade, here we are, the third lesson of our unit on homeostasis and physiology, and we're going to be continuing talking about homeostasis today and looking at specific examples of two particular variables in different organisms. So physiology and homeostasis, looking at plants and animals that are not humans today. So here's your template for today. Make sure you give yourself space to draw a graph here and another graph here. You need a little bit of research on this piece at the end of the lesson, and we're talking about two examples of this process of thermoregulation and osmoregulation. Okay, so first let's talk about, remember if you're doing this digitally, you still need to make sure that you have organized notes with the correct subtitles, lesson title, all that kind of stuff, so I can still find your information for you very clearly when you're studying and as you're keeping notes, okay? Okay, so it's really important we think about not just humans when we're talking about physiology, we're talking about homeostasis, other organisms need to do it as well. And I don't want this unit to be too anthropocentric, so we're going to make sure we also talk about other organisms to give you kind of a broader background in examples of this. So if you think back to our phenomenon, we looked at crocodiles in our unit, and they were maintaining homeostasis in a very specific way. What were they doing? Well, they were sticking their snouts through the ice during winter time, so that they're able to still get oxygen and to breathe carbon dioxide, even though their body's hibernating underneath the water where it's less crazy temperature changes. They're still getting that gas exchange they need by having their snouts kind of above the ice. Okay, with this dog, here we have a dog. How is it maintaining its body temperature? Well, if you notice, looking at the dog, it has its tongue out, mouth open. It is panting. And panting is a strategy that dogs and a variety of other organisms use, including birds actually, as a way to cool down if they get too hot. So trying to pass cool air of their warm air out of their mouth with their tongue and take in cool air to help cool their entire body. Okay, we have a plant here, just general kind of leaf, and it's trying to maintain homeostasis of oxygen, water, and carbon dioxide. So 3 different variables, all of the leaf. How is it doing that? Well, if you can see here in the leaf is a little tiny opening here. It's called a stomata, and it can open and close. So carbon dioxide comes in the leaf through the stomata, and of course we need carbon dioxide to have the carbon to make sugar and photosynthesis, and we need to have water that's going to be lost through what's called transpiration of the leaf, and then oxygen is also going to be being produced and left out here. Now the plant doesn't want to lose too much water if there's not enough water, but it needs to take in carbon dioxide. So the cells here that control the stomata being open or closed are called guard cells, and they will open and close based on these variables. Based on, do I have enough carbon dioxide? Do I need to save water, or can I afford to lose some water? All those kinds of things. So the key idea here is that every single organism, they need to maintain certain physiological variables at a set point. Not every organism maintains all of them. It depends on the organism. We'll go to a bunch of different examples today for that, but every organism has some variables they need to maintain. Okay, so we're going to start. The first example here is thermoregulation. So have you ever heard of the term warm-blooded and cold-blooded? So this is the graph you have to draw, and here is the body temperature of the organisms, and here is the ambient temperature or the environmental temperature. So you have 2 examples here, a snake, and this is its curve, its graph, and here is a bobcat, and here's its one. So which one would you say is warm-blooded and which one would you say is cold-blooded? Well, the term warm-blooded usually means an organism who maintains an internal body temperature, so that would be the bobcat. Its temperature changes very little, no matter how much the environmental temperature changes. And then one that is going to be cold-blooded, it's because its body temperature does change the environment, it doesn't maintain its own temperature, will be the snake, right? And its temperature was going to vary quite a bit. Its body temperature changes a lot based on the environment's temperature. This is the first graph you need to draw in your notebook. You don't have to draw the bobcat and the snake, but you should definitely include the lines, label them, and show the temperature gradients on both axes. Okay, so warm-blooded organisms, also known as endotherms, like the bobcat here, they're going to use energy. They expend energy to maintain their internal body temperature. So they're working to maintain their body temperature at a set point based on it varies by species. And the term for this is endothermic. So endo means inside, and therm is temperature. So they're trying to maintain a certain internal temperature. Whereas cold-blooded organisms, they don't spend any energy maintaining a certain temperature. They just adapt to whatever their environment they're in. So the temperature changes with the environment. So look at the graph here. When it's 10 degrees in the environment, it's 10 degrees inside the snake. When it's 20 degrees in the environment, it's 20 degrees inside the snake. Okay, so it adapts to the environmental temperature. It doesn't spend any energy or effort to maintain its own particular body temperature. Now, both of those choices or kind of styles of life of thermoregulation have specific advantages and disadvantages. I want you to think for a minute in terms of the organism and its life and how it kind of navigates the world and what it has to do. What are some advantages and disadvantages of being an endotherm versus being an ectotherm? Okay, so in an endotherm, they're able to live in more extreme environments. They don't have to stay in really just tropical places. They can stay where it's colder or where it's warmer, and they can maintain and keep their body at a certain temperature. And their metabolism is also mostly temperature independent. Now, they can't deal with it if it gets too extremely cold. They can get cold like humans. We're endotherms. And if we get too cold, our body can't maintain our warm temperature, we can get hypothermia. And if we get too hot, when it's too extremely hot, we can also end up getting a heat stroke. So while we're more flexible, can't live just anywhere. So examples of endotherms, you look here, would be birds, mammals like such as humans, marsupials, and monotremes. Monotremes, if you don't know, those are mammals that can lay eggs. There's a few different examples of them. Okay, so this means though that endotherms need to have a lot of food, about 5 times as much food as an ectotherm of the same size. So we need that much extra energy to be able to maintain that internal body temperature. Okay, ectotherms, they don't have to spend all that energy thermoregulating, so they can eat a lot less. So some ectotherms here we have reptiles, fish, insects, plants, and invertebrates are all examples of ectotherms. They just adapt to their environment's temperature. They don't adjust their temperature at all. But they can't live in really, really cold or very, very hot places. And if they do live in those places, they have to find some sort of strategy to adapt. For example, trees will lose their leaves or have very, very small leaves. Maybe the snake in the desert will bury itself underground during the day to keep itself from getting too hot, to find a way to either escape the heat or go to sleep, hibernate, something if they're ectotherms in extreme environments. Okay, so here are 4 different species who thermoregulate, and I want you to take a minute and think about, are these endotherms or ectotherms, and how are they regulating their temperature? So we have an iguana here, an elephant, we have a bunch of chickens, and we have some penguins. So what is each of them doing? Are they endotherms or ectotherms? So the only ectotherm we have here is the iguana. And if you notice here, it's sunning itself on the rock so it can heat up. So it's changing its environment from being in the cold water to being in the warm rock in the sun to heat itself up a little bit. The other 3 here, these are all endotherms. So the elephant, to cool itself off, it's spraying itself with water to help cool itself down. We have the penguins who are all clumping together into a big group to help keep each other warm. The ones in the middle will be warmest, and they usually take turns being on the outside. So they can get cold, and they kind of rotate in, so everyone has a turn being in the middle and getting very warm. And then here we have chickens that are too hot. They're going to hang out in the shade. So they all have different strategies, behavioral strategies they will do to help maintain a certain temperature. Okay, the second variable we're going to be talking about today is called osmoregulation, and this is talking about a couple variables. It's talking about water level and ions, specifically salts, sodium and chloride ions, which are very important physiological variables for a variety of organisms. So in humans and other mammals, we use kidneys. So we have 2 kidneys, and the kidneys will take in all the blood and filter it and remove the salts and water from the blood, and they get rid of any excess in the urine. So any water we need to keep, we'll take out before it goes to the urine. You'll notice your urine color probably it changes when you're dehydrated. It gets darker in color, there's less of it. So your kidneys are regulating the amount of water you're going to lose through your urine. It's the same thing with salts, trying to maintain a certain level of salts in your body. Too much, you get rid of the excess. Not enough, you don't let very much out with the urine. Plants do this too. So here's the leaf of a mangrove tree, and mangroves tend to live at the border between fresh water and salty water. So maybe the edge between a river and the sea. It has this kind of turgid water where it's going to be a little bit salty. So, but that salt isn't good for them. So what mangroves are able to do is they can take in the water that they need through their roots, and then that water contains salts in it that they don't need, and they exude the salt through pores on their leaves. So salt crystals on a mangrove leaf. We'll actually harvest the salt from mangrove leaves. Okay, so there are different strategies to do this, especially if you are an organism that lives in the water. If you're living in the water, you don't have to worry about conserving water. You live in water, it's everywhere. So they have a choice of two different strategies for aquatic organisms, and those would be to be an osmoregulator, where they're going to maintain a specific ion concentration, or an osmoconformer, which is adapt to the environment. So I want you to think about, using the example of thermoregulation, what could be the consequence, kind of pros and cons of this. So I'm an osmoregulator. If you look at this diagram here, it's going to be absorbing water through the skin. So the blue arrows show water movement. So I'm taking a little bit of water in, a lot of water in through gills, but a lot of water is excreted. Because I live in water, I don't need a lot of water. And then the ions, the salts, are the red arrows, a lot of being taken through the gills, some removed out through the skin, and a little bit removed as well through the urine. And they only drink a little bit of water because they're taking so much in when they breathe through their gills. Whereas an osmoconformer, it's going to have as high as about 35% seawater salinity, it's about 35% blood salinity. It's going to maintain the same kind of salinity level in the organism's blood as it is in the environment around it. It's going to excrete some salts, it's going to be taking in a lot of salts as well, kind of maintaining ingest salt with the food. It's taking in a lot of salt and water and maintaining the same level inside its body as the sea around it. So, consequences, pros and cons of each strategy. Pause the video, think about it, talk to somebody else. What do you think is going on here? Okay, so osmoregulators, they have to use a lot of energy, just like endotherms use a lot of energy, so do osmoregulators. They have to regulate their internal environment. They have to get rid of ions or hold on to ions and water based on the need, based on their environment they're in, based on their particular, their body's need at that point. Now, how salty the environment is, the salinity of the environment has a really big impact on how osmoregulation happens in different organisms. So if they're living in salt water, there's lots and lots of ions around, lots of salt in the water to get, so they only need a little bit of water in their urine. If they're in fresh water, they're taking a lot of water to get a little bit of salt, so they're going to shed a lot of water in urine to try and get the salt they need from the water. In osmoconformers, they don't have to spend energy regulating their internal environment. So they have that energy saving just like ectotherms do, but the problem is they can only live in certain salinities. If it gets too salty or too fresh, they can't handle that and they can't live there. So there's types of environment which gives them a lot less flexibility to move around. So this is the graph I want you to draw here. Okay, notice here's the environment's osmolarity, so the concentration of ions in the water, and here's the body osmolarity. Now, this is kind of the equal line for internal external osmolarity. If it's equal, it'll be exactly on that line. So a perfect osmoregulator is going to have the same body fluid osmolarity all the time. Okay, and a strict osmoconform is going to have the same sort of conformance environment all the time. But there actually are some extremes. We have stronger and weaker regulators. We have limited regulators, different kind of examples as well. So draw this as well and compare it to the graph for the endotherm, ectotherm. Same kind of idea, we have the environment versus the body. Okay, so your task now is to take what you've just learned about osmoregulation and about thermoregulation and apply it to another organism. You can pick any organism you want, but it can't be one we didn't already talk about. So it can't be elephants or penguins or fish or sharks or dogs. It'll be something different that we haven't talked about in this lesson. You're going to research 2 variables only, how it thermoregulates and how it osmoregulates. You're going to record this information in your notes, in your notebook template, and make sure to use the right terminology: ectotherm, endotherm, osmoconformer, osmoregulator, those kinds of terms. And there is a typo. Okay, so that's your task for today. We also have a big idea. So we finished one of our 4 big ideas today. So what happens when a physiological variable moves too far from set point? You can talk about a couple examples here to start in general to start, at least 3 or 4 sentences. Okay, so your homework is to upload your pictures. So it'll be 2 pages of your notes, including your research and your big idea. If you're doing this digitally, you still need to upload the actual document. You can either download, if you're doing Google Doc, download it as a PDF and upload it to Schoology. I'm not taking links, and don't share your files with me, guys. I can't keep track of everybody that way. You have to keep it on Schoology so I can see it that way. Okay? Don't forget to include your research. And I hope this is informative for you, and you guys have a good day.